Howdy, everybody. We are doing our presentation over South Africa, and this presentation is by Brett Butler, Cameron Hudson, Reed Roberts, Brendan Preston, and Travis Harrington. The economy of South Africa originally began in 1652 when Dutch settlers arrived to establish a shipping station. The colony had higher growth rates as Dutch farmers and slaves came to what is now known as South Africa. In the 1770s, colonists of modern-day South Africa had conflicts with indigenous people that hindered growth. The colony eventually turned into a British colony in the 1800s. In 1867, diamonds were found in modern-day Northern Cape, and this discovery led to later findings of diamonds all over the country. South Africa emerged as the biggest source of gem-quality diamonds in the mid-20th century, and gold was discovered in 1886, which led to the breakout of the Anglo-Boer South African War. In 1910, the Union of South Africa was created, and which was used to create apartheid in South Africa, and South Africa held its first democratic election in 1994. South Africa has been famously referred to as the Rainbow Nation because it is made up of so many different cultures and religions. Contained within South African borders are Zulu, Pedi, Tswana, Hindu, Muslim, Afrikaner people, and many more. The phrase was elaborated upon by President Nelson Mandela in his first month in office in 1994 when he proclaimed, "Each of us is as intimately attached to the soil of this beautiful country as are the famous Jacaranda trees of Pretoria and the mimosa trees of Bushveld, a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world." South Africa has one of the most diverse populations in the world. South Africa has a population of 51.7 million. There are 47 million people that are Black, 4.5 million that are white, 4.6 people that are other colored, and 1.3 million that are Indian or Asian. The Black population of South Africa is split into four major ethnic groups, where there are two dominant ones. The majority of the white population is Afrikaans descent, while the other 40% is European descent. There are 11 official languages in South Africa, being Afrikaans, Ndebele, English, Swazi, Siswati, Tsonga, Zulu, Venda, Xhosa, Sepedi, and Tswana. South Africa's political transition is known as one of the most remarkable political feats of the last century, especially in the last century. It has seen many changes in the political workings regarding race that is striving to promote equality. South Africa is considered a democracy and has been since the 1870s. South Africa's program of action was implemented in 2014 and focuses on 14 priority outcomes. These 14 priority outcomes include improving education, health, safety, security, economic growth and development, employment, skills development, infrastructure, rural development, human settlement, local government, environment, international relationships, public sector, social protection, and nation building and social cohesion. The president of South Africa is Matamela Ramaphosa, and the deputy president is David Mabuza. South Africa is abundant in many minerals, including diamonds, gold, iron, copper, and other natural resources. South Africa is the second highest producer of uranium in Africa behind only Namibia, and uranium is used to power nuclear reactors that produce electricity that powers many different sectors. South Africa has the second largest uranium reserves in the whole world. South Africa was the world's largest exporter of platinum, manganese ore, chromium ore, and titanium ore in 2020. South Africa has some of the most beautiful land in Africa, and as it attracts such large numbers of tourists every year, it is estimated that 10% of the country's labor force is in this industry. South Africa has only 0.47% of its land covered in forests, but despite this, foresting contributes to about 11% of the nation's agricultural income and employs about 160,000 people. South Africa is one of the largest coal producers in the world and exports coal more than most nations in the world. The country of South Africa is located at the bottom of the continent of Africa. It is bordering with Namibia, and Namibia and South Africa haven't always had stable relationships because since 1969, South Africa passed laws illegalizing South African occupations of Namibia. It neighbors Botswana, and South Africa has had good relationships with Botswana and even have unrestricted free trade between both countries. Zimbabwe and South Africa have had good relationships since the end of apartheid. However, there have been some tensions between the countries due to dislike of the Zimbabwe government. Eswatini, much like Zimbabwe's relationship with South Africa, Eswatini has had a friendly relationship with South Africa since the end of apartheid. And Lesotho is over here. It is in the middle of South Africa. It is completely landlocked, and they have a complicated relationship with each other, since a lot of people from both countries think that Lesotho should be an annex of South Africa, and that it's a little dumb that Lesotho has its own government and its own currency when it's completely landlocked by another country.
All right, now we get to the internal problems of South Africa. Now, these are problems that stem within their own country and are things businesses and other foreign entities are going to look at when investing any sort of money into this country. Now, the problems that internally affect South Africa and what they can do is the corruption and mismanagement of government. They are known for a very inefficient bureaucracy, which stems from the corruption, significant unemployment, violent crime, insignificant infrastructure, poor government service delivery to impoverished communities, large government budget deficits, limited amounts of water, and poor education. Now, these are all things that stem within the country, and a lot of these have intersectionality and topple and create even larger problems. And the limited amount of water really does affect the agriculture in South Africa. Now, the external problems, one very prominent external problem that South Africa faces is the large influx of immigrants from other parts of Africa. Now, most of these immigrants are refugees seeking asylum due to the persecution, or they are simply trying to find a way into Africa's third largest economy. This means that on top of the large influx of legal immigrants, there has been a large spike in illegal immigrants entering the country. This creates competition for jobs, which creates tension as well as violence between the refugees and local communities. This helps contribute to the poverty and crime rates and is a problem that needs to be addressed in order to make the government of South Africa more efficient. Now, another outside dilemma that dampens South Africa progress is their openness with foreign investment into their emerging markets. While on the surface, this can seem like a positive thing for any country, with South Africa, it has actually gotten to the point where they rely too much on these external investments to keep their country economy going. Now, a sudden outbreak of global risk aversion or market turbulence could trigger an unwelcome outcome to the country's external capital. And this was experienced slightly in 2020, but their economy has since rebounded. And any modern fluctuation in the high levels of the external financing would make the financing of the country's twin deficits, budgets, and current account much more difficult to manage. Not to mention, this would add even more of a strain to the unemployment situation that has arisen in South Africa, and this would create even a higher level of unemployment. Now, the income gap. South Africa is known globally for their income equality. The top 10% wealthiest in the country earn around 60% of the country's total income, and South Africa has the highest Gini coefficient in the world at 0.63. Now, this is not a good thing, and a part of this is due to how assets were distributed during apartheid, and this has lingered even in today's world, where it's 30 years later and people still can't come back from the hole they were put in by the system. Now, macroeconomic data for South Africa. South Africa has the third largest GDP in Africa at 335 billion USD, behind Nigeria and Egypt, who each have a significantly higher population than South Africa. Their poverty headcount ratio is decreasing, but is still relatively high at almost 55.5 in 2019, which is half their population. This is higher than most other African countries, most likely because their poverty line is already relatively high compared to other African countries at $1.95 USD a day. And South Africa's life expectancy fell as low as 53 years in 2004, but has been increasing since 2019 to 64 years old. The South African economy. The economy of South Africa is the third largest in the continent and is classified as an upper middle income economy, largely known as the world's largest exporters of gold, platinum, and other natural resources, but is slowly making a shift towards the service industry since the end of apartheid. Recently, the shift has a well-established financial, legal, energy, communication sectors, and currently contains the continent's largest stock exchange. GDP dropped to 335 billion in 2020, but rebounded to 415 billion in 2021 and is expected to grow to 453 billion by 2023. Finance, manufacturing, general government services are the largest providers to the country's GDP, with mining and quarrying being the 11th largest contributor to GDP. Now, as we can see here, GDP per capita USD and purchase power polarity, we can see where these levels stand. And we can see that in 2008, they were affected by the financial market crash here in the United States, as well as they were affected in 2016. Now, as we can also see, during 2020, their GDP did fall. Now, these graphs don't show it because these are the World Banks, but they have rebounded since. Now, GDP analysis. A major issue in South Africa's economic history was apartheid. This was put in place in 1948 and lasted until the early 90s. This had a large effect on the distribution of wealth between groups, which ultimately affects income. And this affected the education system by creating a disproportionate amount of skilled workers to unskilled workers. Now, the top challenges of doing business in South Africa are an inefficient government bureaucracy, a shortage of skilled workers, political instability, corruption, and vigorous labor regulations. Now, the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986 was a law enacted by the United States Congress, which imposed import bans on many South African goods, and many other nations followed suit. This was to financially pressure the system and to making progress towards a true democracy with equal representation. After Nelson Mandela's election in 1994, sanctions began to lift. At the start of 2000s, the then president vowed to promote economic growth and foreign investment by relaxing the vigorous restrictive labor laws and stepping up the pace of privatization, raising government spending, and cutting interest rates sharply from the 1998 levels. From 2004 onward, economic growth picked up significantly, both in employment and capital formation, which is a big thing, which is a large part of GDP growth rates. Now, the state-owned enterprise of South Africa have had large impacts in the country's economy due to their ownership in a wide array of important industries. Now on to the 5 largest problems facing South Africa. Thank you. Yeah.
5 main problems facing South Africa. These 5 problems were identified as major issues by the South African government. These are issues that have a direct impact on growth and development. In order for growth and true development to occur, these problems must be addressed. First, economic reconstruction and recovery. Next, unemployment, education, health, and crime. First, economic reconstruction and recovery. The South African Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan is a policy document outlining the country's response to the COVID-19 crisis. The plan is organized in 3 phases. First, a direct response to the health crisis to save lives. Second, reforms and other interventions to restore the country's economic well-being while monitoring the health risk. And third, building a resilient inclusive, and sustainable economy. Among the many priorities mentioned by the government, energy security and energy industries are major components of this recovery plan. The economic recovery is deemed fragile at the moment. Despite the growth rebound, poverty and inequality did not show signs of growth. Reconstructing the National Electric Company is critical to ensure energy security, reduce fiscal risks, and transition away from coal-powered energy. Next is unemployment. South Africa's unemployment rate rose to a new record high of 35.3% in the fourth quarter of 2021, from 34.9% in the third quarter, due to job losses mainly in manufacturing and construction. South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world currently. Pre-pandemic, the economy was already suffering from high levels of joblessness and problems like persistent electricity cuts choked growth, contributing to poverty and inequality. In the fourth quarter of 2021, unemployed persons increased by 278,000 to a total of 7.9 million. In a quote by Bloomberg, he says, strict labor laws and skills shortage reduced the ability of South African companies to hire new workers. The apartheid-era strategy of placing so-called townships where many Black citizens were compelled to live on the outskirts of the cities also makes it difficult for residents to access the formal labor market. Next is education. While South Africa's education statistics are improving, they rank very low in tertiary education compared to similar countries. They rank the lowest in OECD countries for female education, and they rank the lowest in OECD countries for education and healthcare. Very few South Africans attend college. They have the lowest college attendance among OECD countries. And there's also very little public funding that goes to education past primary and secondary schooling. The select few that do attend college are most likely to obtain business degrees. Next is health. Some of the largest health issues in South Africa are transferable diseases like HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis. The infant mortality rate is 25.78 out of 100. The United States has an infant mortality rate of 5.6 out of 1,000 in comparison. The maternal mortality rate is also high, though gender-directed policies have been improving. They have a rate of 128 deaths per 100,000 children born, compared to the US 23.8. Finally, crime. Around 57 people are murdered in South Africa each day. Violent crimes are trending upwards, having more violent crimes in the year prior for the last 3 years. They rank 6th in the world for crime. USA is ranked 30th, and they rank 1st in the world in rape per capita. They have one of the highest inequality rates also, with a Gini coefficient of 63.
Okay, current solutions for crime in South Africa. Right now, the government's priorities for reducing crime include improving police visibility, police training, and police resources. Just allocating more money to the police in general. One thing that South Africa is doing right now is trying to grow their tourism industry. And by doing this, they're establishing the South African Police Service, or SAPS, which will increase the visibility of police in identified tourist attraction sites. So tourists feel more safe at sites, and it encourages tourism in the country as a whole. And to combat the growing problem of criminal groups extorting money from businesses in South Africa, the government has organized specialized units by bringing together the SAPS and the National Protection Agency. These agencies, both the SAPS and the NPA, both try to protect businesses from this extorting of money by criminal groups. So the effectiveness of the current programs in South Africa. While South Africa has taken important steps to diminish the amount of gender-based violence, they have not provided adequate funding for shelters and other services for survivors of gender-based violence. Many victims as well have been made more vulnerable during the COVID-19 pandemic, being forced to stay home with their abusers. As we all know, this is a tough time for everyone, especially domestic violence victims, as they're forced to stay home with their abusers, the people that quite literally took advantage of them. Government support to shelters during the pandemic varied enormously among different provinces. It was almost like a pick and choose type thing, where government would just pick shelters in South Africa, and it varied greatly, just depending. So it's almost the best luck of the draw, which doesn't help. There has not been enough access to help with domestic violence for further marginalized groups such as the LGBTQ as well. Looking at other programs in other countries, and in this first instance in Texas, we see the Family Violence Program, which provides emergency shelter and supportive services for victims and their children, domestic violence victims and their children, educates the public about it, and provides training and prevention support to organizations across the state. And just a program like this in South Africa would do really well as people become more educated about the effects of family violence and domestic violence. Also in Istanbul, the Istanbul Convention is a European international treaty designed to prevent violence against women and domestic violence. Participating countries are obligated to provide services such as adequate number of shelters, rape crisis centers, free 24/7 helplines, and psychological counseling and medical care for victims. It offers protection to all women and girls without discrimination, as well as focuses on dismantling stereotypes and prejudice. So just something like this as well, which Europe has implemented, would also work a lot in South Africa, is just like the stigma behind domestic violence in South Africa isn't as well received in Europe and other places, more Western nations. So it's something like that, where there's all these shelters, more shelters would do numbers as well, would do really well. And some international nonprofit organizations or NPOs in South Africa. South Africa's Department of Social Development is the government's primary provider of assistance to the poor. It has 76,000 nonprofit groups, which employs more than 1 million people and offers social development help at almost every level. So something like that South Africa has implemented is actually really helpful and provides a lot of assistance to the poor, which, as we know, looking at other slides, the unemployment rate in South Africa is one of the highest in the world. I think it is the highest in the world right now, currently. So something like that helps the poor is very beneficial to this country. Gender Links is an organization that shoots to promote gender equality and justice through their use of advocacy and pilot projects. Gender Links has project sites all over the world and is highly funded. So another thing that just promotes gender equality and this sort of culture in South Africa, where women are not equal to men. UNICEF. So we all know UNICEF. We all heard this one. This organization gives help to those stuck in poverty by improving children's lives through healthcare, immunization, clean water, and better nutrition. This org has one of the highest expense ratios, meaning that 88.9% of money donated to this charity goes into helping the poor. So next time you donate to UNICEF, now you know. And that's a great organization as well, especially in South Africa and the provinces around South Africa, countries around it. Kalisa Social Solutions. This charity organization works with businesses and the South African government to coordinate projects that are aimed at improving those who are on the margins of society, such as the poor, ex-offenders, victims of crimes, and those who need help developing a business. So this is a great organization helping out those, almost giving like a step ahead, like a second chance nearly to a lot of these people, especially the ex-offenders, and reaching out and just encouraging growth in these communities. Mothers to Mothers is a charity that trains HIV positive mothers to help other HIV positive mothers, as well as hospitals to prevent the virus from spreading and how to stay healthy with the virus. So just these HIV positive mothers just corroborating and helping each other out and really educating the public on how to stay healthy with the virus, HIV. One of the best strategies right now to solve the gender-based violence problem is prevention of violence. Well, it's the prevention of violence in general, but it starts at the individual, then the community, and finally society levels. This strategy base is rooted in teaching the youth so that eventually it becomes a social expectation that violence is never the solution, and there is a strong environment that protects against violence of any form. This strategy involves teaching the youth through educational, social, emotional programs, offering healthy relationship programs for couples, as well as therapy, family-based programs that teach the family as a whole, place emphasis on family relationship by including them in their school activities on special awareness days, create protective environments by improving organizational policies and modifying the physical environments of neighborhoods, support survivors of violence by offering housing programs, and finally, strengthen economic supports for families by offering incentives for parents to attend these educational programs. The highlights of these programs that help foster these safe environments are rooted in preventing and combating violence against women and treating everyone equally by dismantling prejudice and stereotypes. So all of it starts at the youth level, right? The community, and getting the whole society to change the norm, the culture of violence, this norm of violence, and educating the youth and families about it. And it starts at that level, and as generations go by, it proceeds throughout. And here are some of our sources for our slides. And that's going to be it. Thank you.